Good morning, and welcome to Sandy Springs Christian Church for this, our hybrid in-person live streaming worship experience. We're so glad that you all are here, both those of you who are present in our sanctuary this morning, but also those of you who are joining us at home today. We're glad that you're here. Hope you enjoy this time of worship with us, as we do each and every Sunday. I want to extend a special welcome to those who might be visiting. We're glad that you're here, whether in person or watching from home, and we do hope you find this worship service meaningful this morning. Before we get started, just a few announcements today for all of us. A reminder to you that our theme for this next year is to reconnect to one another, to God, to our faith community. We're trying to find several different ways to do that, one of which was emailed to you this last week through an e-blast about finding some time with myself, with your fellow congregants to sign up and spend a few moments catching up, 30, 45 minutes. There are several time slots available. If you have trouble signing up, don't hesitate to call the church office, get with Amy. She can help you find a time slot that's convenient for you, but we do look forward to reconnecting to you in this new year. Next Saturday, we are having our annual leadership retreat, and so just a reminder to you of those who are a part of our leadership team, the elders, the trustees. We'll meet from 8 to noon via Zoom next Saturday. The information's in your newsletter. Following that Saturday, on next Sunday, we will install all of that leadership here during worship, and so if you are part of the new leadership team, it'd be great to have you both tuning in online or here in the sanctuary for that installation. And then finally, today, a reminder to you that after this meeting, we are having our annual congregational meeting. It is taking place both in person and via Zoom. We have experimented for a long time this morning to make sure that everything's working, and so we hope it does. But for those of you who are home, of course, just hang out for a few minutes, wait, and we'll have that Zoom link up, and you can join that meeting a few minutes after worship today. For those of you who are staying for that meeting, just stay seated in the sanctuary for that meeting. If you are leaving, just wait for one of the ushers to escort you out following worship today. I think those are the announcements I've got for us this morning. Let's continue in a spirit of worship today as we hum along our hymn this morning as Mary Ann leads us.
Nothing like a grand entrance this morning. Join me in prayer. Gracious, loving God, we worship you because you are love. You are all that is validating. You take us at our weakest and help shape us into our strongest. Your gospel empowers us to be the people that can affect each other with your goodness and strength. Despite our best intentions, we find ourselves falling short of where we want to be and how we want to grow. We are, at the same time, so blessed and so broken, but you are there in the midst of the struggle. You are there to affirm us in our goodness and to hold us in our brokenness. You tell us that we are nothing less than the blessed and beautiful people you created us to be, while affirming and nudging us to grow into more and better along the way. Hear our prayers this morning and mold us into your faithful people, loving God. Lord, there are those among us that need your special prayers. We lift those to you now, both aloud and in silence of our hearts. Now let us pray the prayer your Son taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. We now invite the children to meet their sponsors in the back of the sanctuary for children's worship.
I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the desolate pit, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Happy are those who make the Lord their trust, who do not turn to the proud, to those who go to astray after false gods. You have multiplied, O Lord my God, your wondrous deeds and your thoughts towards us. None can compare with you. Were I to proclaim and tell them, they will be more than can be counted.
Sacrifice and offering you do not desire, but you've given me an open ear. Burnt offering and sin offering you have not required. Then I said, Here I am. In the scroll of the book it is written for me. I delight to do your will, O my God, your law is within my heart. I've told the great news of deliverance in the great congregation. See, I have not restrained my lips, as you know, O Lord. I have not hidden your saving help within my heart. I have spoken of your love and faithfulness from the great congregation. Do not, O Lord, withhold your mercy from me. Let your steadfast love and faithfulness keep me safe forever. Here ends the reading inspired by God. May God grant us wisdom and courage for interpretation.
Well, Miss Cornelia is one of the characters who vividly populates the Anne of Green Gables novels. She's a church-going lady, a devout Christian. One morning she asks Miss Susan about the health of a mutual friend, and Miss Susan replies, "Oh, I'm afraid she's going to have to rely on the Lord now." Miss Cornelia responds with horror, "Oh no, surely it isn't as bad as all of that." It's funny, and yet it's true. Ironic, even, if you think about it. That for those of us who refer to ourselves as people of faith, honest reliance on God is, at least most of the time, well, a last resort. Or at least entrusting ourselves and those we love to God only seems to happen in circumstances like we find ourselves in when it's the last cause. Now, the truth is, more often than not, we only truly ask God for help when we have nowhere else to turn. Now, don't get me wrong, I totally get it. After all, we're taught to be self-sufficient in our culture. It isn't altogether necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if we work hard enough, things will turn out all right. If we keep just trying, things will get better. If we just pray hard enough, God will certainly provide, right? In fact, some would argue there's biblical precedent for such thinking. Many point to James to make such a case when he writes, "Faith without works is dead." And I agree to an extent. Faithfulness to God is not simply belief, but also practice. It's not enough to just believe in Jesus. We also must follow him. It's just that at least into our psalm reading today, our salvation, both in this life and the next, doesn't seem tied up in what we do. Or at least it doesn't seem to be quite that simple. One commentator calls Psalm 40 the mud psalm, perhaps in part because it muddies our works righteousness theology, but more so because it's thought that David wrote it literally after an experience in the mud. Out in the wilderness with his troop of men, hiding from a crazed king exploring the land, suddenly David stumbles into a swamp, sinks down into the mire, and gets stuck in the mud alone. He cries out, "Help me, God, help me, please." But nothing at first. So he's forced to wait, trying not to struggle, slime rising up his legs, panic rising in his blood. As we all know, if you fight the mud, it claims you. Instead, you must fight the fear and keep still if you're going to have a chance of getting out. I know it's antithetical to the way that we think, but the only way to beat quicksand is to be still and patient. All you can do is cry out for help. Well, sure enough, help comes, in the form of his men, mind you. And with strength and strategy and care, they pull him out of the mire and connect his feet back to the ground. And as a result, a song of praise is placed in his mouth. Specifically, this psalm of thanksgiving for God's faithfulness and steadfast love. After all, David wasn't saved because of anything he did. In fact, David was only saved when he submitted to the circumstances, becoming completely and utterly reliant upon God. I wonder if you can relate. I mean, have you ever felt like you were trudging through the mire, clawing up with everything you had to get out, and realized you were completely helpless? Maybe you felt this way sometime in 2020. Every morning waking up only to roll over and look at your phone as a distraction. Or sitting behind your computer filling your day with emails and Zoom meetings to pass the time. Or binge watching a television series or planning a post-COVID vacation, anything to keep your mind busy so as to not feel or experience the pain of your life and in this world. The psalm doesn't read, though, that I worked hard for the Lord and I was saved. No, it reads, I waited patiently for the Lord. I wonder if sometimes we are working so hard, as James encourages, that we miss the beauty of God's presence. I wonder if sometimes we're doing so much to follow Jesus that we lose sight of him altogether. I wonder if sometimes we focus so much on practicing faithfulness that we miss out on God's faithfulness. I can remember when I was in the third grade, I went through the pastor's class at my home church, planning to be baptized as a young person. All of my friends were preparing for their baptism, and I had genuinely felt God's pull on my life too. As I finished the class, though, my parents informed me that I wasn't going to be baptized with my friends because I was baptized as an infant in the United Methodist Church. Of course, I was upset. I mean, this was my decision. This was my decision. So my parents encouraged me to talk to my pastor about it. He took me to lunch one day, and he asked me very sincerely, why do you want to be baptized again? Now, I responded at the time with what I thought was a very eloquent display of theological understanding about accepting God and deciding to follow Jesus. I told him it wasn't fair that my parents had decided all of this for me. I had no agency in such a decision. This was my personal choice. To which he very graciously responded, Nathan, you didn't choose God. God chose you. Long before you made the decision to accept God, long before your parents decided to have you baptized, God had already named you, claimed you, and loved you. Nothing you do or your parents do will ever change that. Of course, at the time, I didn't really understand what he was saying. I mean, at the end of the day, this guy just needed to dunk me like the rest of my friends, right? But today, I appreciate his response more than ever. He's right, of course. There's nothing we do to find favor or lose favor with God. Or as Frederick Buechner beautifully puts it, there's nothing you have to do. Nothing you have to do. Nothing you have to do. Which I recognize is counterintuitive to us. After all, that's just not the way the world works. In fact, most of us believe the only way to save anything is to try everything. I performed a wedding for the daughter of some friends here in Atlanta a couple of weekends ago. There's nothing like the power of the moment in which two people pledge themselves to one another for better or worse, richer or poorer, sickness and in health. Through tears of joy, I've watched hundreds of couples like this one vow to love one another no matter what. And yet, no matter how genuine that love might be, without exception, I always follow the vows they make to one another with a prayer that specifically asks God to help this newly wedded couple to keep their marital vows. After all, with a 50% divorce rate in our country, we know how difficult keeping such promises can be, especially in a marriage. In fact, I've watched couples do everything they knew to do to make it work. And yet sometimes it just doesn't. I can remember talking to one couple about their recent divorce. The husband said to me, "We did everything we knew to do, left no stone unturned. We worked harder on our marriage than anything either of us have ever worked on in our lives, and we still couldn't save it." Sometimes even our most faithful attempts at saving our most sacred covenants turns out to be impossible to save. And when that's your experience, why would we believe that God is any different? It's no wonder we have a hard time trusting in God's faithfulness, especially when a pandemic hits and so many people suffer, or when a life is taken unnecessarily by those we believe who are to protect us, or when prayers for healing are met with death, or when we need presence and only feel absence, or when we work so hard for a cause for so long only for all that work to be seemingly undone. We can't help but wonder, what have I done wrong, God, or why haven't I done enough? But then, somewhere closer than you think, in a driveway perhaps down the street, a father who feels completely helpless walks outside only to discover the prodigal son has come home. And on a roadside right outside your neighborhood, a man's been beaten and robbed and left for dead only for his enemy to show up and to save him. And in a home, maybe even right next door, a woman's lost one tiny coin and vows to not give it up until she's found it. And the same in a pasture just outside the city. One sheep among the 100 has gone missing, and the shepherd refuses to stop looking for it. And in a church, this church, in fact, we say no matter who you are, what you believe, where you're from, what you look like, what you have or have not done in this life, you are welcome at this table. And all of it, of course, because in spite of us, God is faithful to all of us. You know, we've heard a lot the last several weeks about misinformation, disinformation. And I got to thinking about it as it relates to the church. And I worry we've been complicit too. Sending a message for far too long that just isn't true. I realize it comes by us all honestly. But nevertheless, if we've learned anything, it's that we're all called to stand up to misinformation when it's gone on for too long. The greatest in our faith tradition being that to be a good Christian, perhaps even to be a Christian at all, that it's all up to me and you. That to be loved by God, you must live a certain way or believe certain doctrines or even go to a certain church. Things like doubt, weakness, and heaven forbid, good old-fashioned sin are all signs of faithlessness, disqualifying you from the kingdom and making you unworthy of God's love. But we so easily forget that the good news of our faith is not just that we can go to God, but that God comes to us. Not that God gives us the free will to be faithful, but that despite what we might do or don't do, God is always faithful to you and to me. In fact, I can't help but wonder if we've been reading Paul's words wrong all along. Yes, we are saved not by works, but by faith alone. But what if it's not our faith? What if it's God's?
As a younger child growing up in this church, I never thought about how much of a difference your donations have made to Sandy Springs Christian Church. But as I have gotten older, I have seen how the generosity of our church has impacted countless youth, as well as many around the community. Sandy Springs Christian Church has also impacted people far outside our community, and because of your generosity, I have been able to go on 3 life-changing mission trips as a youth in our church. 2 of those mission trips were extended past our borders to Tecate, Mexico, to build a house for 2 different families in need. Standing in the completed house, exhausted, holding hands and singing at the house dedication, I will never forget these moments that were made possible by your generous gifts to Sandy Springs Christian Church. If you would like to give an offering, you can give online, by mail, or by placing your gifts on the offering plates as you are leaving the sanctuary. Thank you.
I know right now for some, politics are just too divisive. I know many of you did not tune into the inauguration on Wednesday, and that's okay. But I did, just like I did 4 years ago and 4 years before that. In most regards, besides the COVID restrictions, it was like all other inaugurations before it. Lots of pomp and circumstance. But I was struck by the former youth poet laureate, Amanda Gorman. She recited her poem, The Hill We Climb, and she talked about her hopes and dreams for our nation, saying, somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that does not mean that we are striving to form a union that is perfect. She also talked about her place in this nation, saying, we, the successors of a country in a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. But the final part of her speech is what has stuck with me the most this week. Gorman ends by saying this: when day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new day blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. In the end, that's all that faith really is. Being brave enough to see the light, having the courage to be the light. If we're doing that, in the end, it doesn't really matter if you're Republican or Democrat or anything in between. Our faith becomes what defines us. And gathering around this table each Sunday reminds us of the light that we have inside of each of us. And if we are brave enough to share it together, if we have the courage, we can light up the world with God's love. Will you pray with me? God, we see your light, and we know that it is good. Help us to continue to follow your light even when it gets hard. May these elements, the bread and the cup, remind us that Jesus shared his light with all that he encountered. And let us strive to leave here doing the same. Amen. And so we do remember that night so long ago when Jesus gathered with his disciples in the upper room, and he took bread, and he blessed it, and he broke it, saying, "This is my body given for you. Take and eat." And in the same way, after supper, he took the cup, and after blessing it, he said, "This cup represents a new covenant, which has been poured out for the forgiveness of many. Drink this in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes again." The table is set, and all are welcome. Let us share the Lord.
As a reminder of who we are called to be as people of both the Christian Church Disciples of Christ and as people of Sandy Springs Christian Church, I invite you at this time to join with me in our disciples' affirmation and our SSCC mission statement. As disciples, we believe God calls us to be and to share the good news of Jesus Christ, witnessing, loving, and serving from our doorsteps to the ends of the earth. Sandy Springs Christian Church shares God's love through inclusivity, service, and spiritual growth. We do come to that time in our service during which, if you have felt God's Spirit move in your life in such a way as to encourage you to join in membership and fellowship with this congregation, we invite you forward at this time at a socially distanced manner. If you're tuning in from home and you've been visiting and want to know more information about our ministry or are interested in membership, please reach out to me, nathan@sandyspringscc.org, or call the church office. We'll be happy to follow up with you on that. And we certainly are accepting members even in this virtual world. And in fact, you'll see one today after our hymn. Let's continue in a spirit of worship as we join in our voices in our final hymn today. Join our hums in unison in our final hymn this morning, "My Faith Looks Up to Thee." We do have a new member who is joining by transfer of membership. She's not yet ready to be in person, and so wanted to introduce herself. And so we've got a video from Angie Brown here this morning.
Hello, Sandy Springs Christian Church. My name is Angie Brown, and I am transferring my membership from Midway Hills Christian Church in Dallas, Texas, to be part of the community here in Sandy Springs. I have been connecting with you through my YouTube subscription and through contact with Nathan. I also have the great privilege of working with Mary Robeck at Emetitus Hospice. My role there is as chaplain and bereavement coordinator. I am ordained in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, having attended seminary at Bright Divinity School at TCU in Fort Worth. I am very much looking forward to ministry with you to bring about God's kingdom here on earth.
We do indeed. Yes, let's clap our hands. We can do that. And even though she can't be with us in person today, of course, she will be tuning in to this worship experience. So let's receive her by way of our affirmation of her coming into membership here. Reaffirming our own faith in Jesus the Christ, we gladly welcome you into this community of faith, enfolding you with our love and committing ourselves to your care. In the power of God's Spirit, let us mutually encourage each other to trust God and strengthen one another to serve others, that Christ's church may in all things stand faithful. We welcome you, Angie, and look forward to getting to know you better in the coming weeks and months ahead, especially as we're able to get to do things more in person here in the coming weeks ahead. As we close out worship this morning, a reminder to you that if you are leaving today before the congregational meeting, just please allow the ushers to escort you out. If you are staying for the meeting, you may stay right where you are, and we're going to get the Zoom up here shortly. For those of you who are tuning in at home, again, just give us a few minutes to get the Zoom link up. You should be able to join here soon after the worship service ends, and we'll get started as soon as we can. Go forth this day reminded, not just of our call to be faithful, but of God's faithfulness in each and every one of us. Go this day in peace. Amen.